And we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. This is our 2022 MICIP collaborative series. And we do have 4 sessions that we're going to be involved in. That's on February 1st. That's today. Then we have 2 weeks from now is the 15th. And then we have March 1st and March 15th. And so we'll kind of go over some details here, do some introductions and go over some logistics, and we'll go ahead and get started. So our outcomes for the full series are we really want to strengthen our district continuous improvement teams and processes. So yes, we will be talking a little bit about the MICIP platform, and we'll be getting in and we'll be looking at some specifics in there. But really the main thing is that we want this process to be really well in place. And so it's not really so much about MICIP and nuts and bolts and how to and that sort of thing. It's really more about making sure that we have all the processes and teams established for district continuous improvement. And then of course, we are going to build some fluency around the actual process itself and the platform. And one of the big things that we really want to highlight in this series is the importance of monitoring and adjusting. And really that is what makes continuous improvement. And so we'll be spending quite a bit of time on monitoring. We actually have a full session dedicated just to that. And specifically for today, if you kind of looked at the way that the series is laid out, today is the day that we are going to really dig into the process and kind of go through top to bottom about what it looks like and what's in there, some resources to get us going. The sorts of things that we need to do outside of MICIP, the sorts of things we need to do in MICIP. And then at our future sessions, we're going to dig into some more specifics. We're going to connect you with a lot of resources today that will really help to strengthen the teams and processes that you either have in place now or that you'd like to have in place. And we're also going to understand where our district is with continuous improvement and really start to think about where would we like to be with this process. So just want to do quick introductions. I'm Dave Hunt. I'm the Continuous Improvement and State and Federal Programs Consultant here at the Muskegon ISD. And I'll let Hilda go ahead and introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hilda Irani from Dearborn Public Schools. I wear a couple of different hats. Recruitment and retention right now is one of my big focuses. And of course, continuous improvement is something that I feel very passionate about. So welcome, and we happy learning.
And Mike.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Fine. I'm the Continuous Improvement and Science Consultant at the Ottawa ISD. And thanks to Dave and MDE for allowing me to be a part of delivering what I think are great processes and a platform for moving us forward in continuous improvement.
All right, thanks, Mike. And I'm coming at you from not snowy yet, Whitehall. We'll see what happens as the day progresses. Somebody said something about getting 18 inches of snow where they're at. I hope that's not happening around here. So, all right. So let's talk about a little bit about our logistics. The first thing I really want to talk about is our dashboard. And so the dashboard is always going to be available at the link that was here today. So if you wanted to just click that link that Mike's been putting in the chat, you're welcome to open it there. And it's also available at this bit.ly link, the 22 MICIP collab. That's going to be the same dashboard that we used through this entire time. So if you want to bookmark that, if you want to add it to your drive, all the resources for the entire series are going to end up being there. So you'll see here that we have all the resources that we're going to go through today. I'm going to come back to this document regularly to share some different pieces here. And this is where we always go back. So if I say, let's go to the dashboard and find this, this is where we're going to want to go. So you're going to want to have this open today. Like I mentioned earlier, our recorded content will be posted right at the top of that dashboard following each of our sessions. And I wanted to really make clear that you can share anything that we talk about with anybody. So the registration for this was free. You can pass it along to people. You can hand it out. You can share the videos. You can do anything that you want with this stuff. It's all totally open and available to give to anybody. You don't need to attend all of our sessions live. So we're going to be doing these live on those Tuesdays that were mentioned, the 1st and 15th of February and the 1st and 15th of March. But you're welcome to participate asynchronously, meaning that you could grab the videos and watch those with a team, or you could go through the resources outside of this. So you're welcome to participate asynchronously. But if you want to have the sketches, they're only available if you're in person. If you want the sketches, you have to be here. But you also have to sign in and sign out. So we try to do a good job of monitoring. And like when we get to the end, if people forgot to sign in or sign out, we try, oh yeah, I saw them here. Let's go ahead and sign them in and out. But it would be a big help for us if you could make sure that you sign yourselves in and out. So when it comes to this whole process, really what we are hoping is that we can crowdsource a lot of the knowledge. And so we want people to put things in the chat. We want you to interact. If you have questions, please post them in the chat, and Hilda and Mike will be monitoring the chat, and we'll try to answer anything in the chat that they can. And then when we get to natural breakpoints, we'll stop to see if there's anything that anybody might want to unmute and ask about. But really, all of you have a lot of knowledge around this as well. And so if you have resources, if you can answer a question that people have, if you have an example that that comes up that goes along with some of the things that we're talking about, please use the chat. We really want to make this interactive, and we want to make this a collaborative series. So not just us kind of talking to you. We really want to get that kind of interaction. And along those lines, we have a resource repository. So I'm going to pop back over to our dashboard, and on the second page of the dashboard, there's the spot that says general resources, and there's a link to the resource repository. And anybody has access to edit this, and you're welcome to come in here and just add any resources that you think would be helpful for the group. And so this was created last year when we did the series, and we have there was a lot of really great things that were shared from different people around the state. And so we're keeping all of those resources that were added last year, and we're welcoming everybody to add any new resources here. And I put in here that really anything that you want to put in here, that it might be if you have something that's homemade, if you have flow charts that explain processes, if you have written processes, anything that you think might be helpful that you made, anything that you found on the web that you think that you would like to link in there, that would be great. So that's just right here, the resource repository. So those are a couple of ways that we're really trying to make this a little bit more collaborative. And so we welcome everybody getting involved. So don't forget to share those resources. And if you have good examples of the things that we're talking about, we welcome you to put those into chat as well. Okay, so we are going to get into things. Before we do, I have a poll that I'd like to set out for everybody. So I'm going to stop my sharing for just 1 second. And I'm going to go ahead and open this poll. It's just 2 quick questions. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. Every once in a while, I have some folks that the poll doesn't work for them. So if that's the case, I apologize. This will be quick and painless. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll now. There's 2 questions. So I'm hoping to get up to that magical 80% participated mark. We're at 68 right now. See if we can get a few more answers in. All right, let's go ahead and share those results. So it looks like we have a pretty good representation. We have some teachers and other staff leaders here. We have quite a few building leaders. We have quite a few district leaders and ISD leaders. And then getting down to how we're feeling about our continuous improvement in MICIP right now. So we have a few yikes out there. Hopefully we can help to move that up for you here while we're here. Looks like a good chunk of us are kind of at that, we're getting started on it. We're working on it. And then we have some folks that are making some good progress. And then we have one person that was feeling really confident about that system. So if you're feeling really confident about your system, we would love to hear more about that. And if you can, if you have some good examples you'd like to put in the chat as we're going along, we'd love to hear from those as well. All right, so that's kind of what we're looking like. That's our makeup of the folks that are here today. And this is kind of just where we are in our processes. So that's a great place to be. And we'll go ahead and move on with our content. All right, so we really like to call this section the pre-work. And this is kind of all of the work that happens outside of the actual MICIP process. And really, this is some of the most important work that you're going to do. And it's really having that common understanding about what is continuous improvement and what is district-led continuous improvement, which is different than what we've experienced in the past. We're also going to talk about team establishment in this section. And so we have some really great resources around both of those that we're going to get into. So this is, if some of this is familiar, then just bear with us. We'll get through some of this and get into the content here in a few minutes. But this is just a little bit of background. I want to make sure that everybody's kind of has the same basic understanding of this and the same conceptual understanding of a few things. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is this is kind of a visual representation of what I would say the old school improvement process using assist. And so this was a very linear process, and this kind of the trigger to start this on a yearly basis was that we would maybe look at some state assessment data, and it was getting to be about June. And I, as an ISD person, I always knew that May and June were hitting because I would start getting emails from people saying, I forgot how to log into Assist, or, you know, now that I'm logged into Assist, I don't remember how to update my goals. And so it was clearly a very compliance driven process that was really kind of just, you know, updated once a year around that May, June time. And really the way that many districts had this work was that it was school based. And each of the schools would make their own plans, and then they would give those plans to someone that worked in a central office, usually like a curriculum director or an assistant superintendent. And that person would kind of compile all of those plans into one big district improvement plan. And those plans ended up being hundreds of pages long. And they were used to really justify everything that went into the consolidated application, which was a separate process. And it's not really any wonder that these were really school-based. That's really how the school improvement law is set up. It says that schools need to have school improvement plans. And so it wasn't that this was wrong or bad. It's just that this was the way that things were set up. And the state really heard from us, all of us, saying that we needed a new and better process, and we really needed to kind of modernize things. And so that's really what we are moving toward with MICIP. And so one of the main things that's different about MICIP that we'll talk a little bit more about is that we're really trying to de-emphasize the reliance on that state assessment data and really put more of an emphasis on whole child, whole school, and whole community data. And so many of you may have seen that the WISC model, which we'll show here in a minute. But getting away from the state assessment data and really getting toward what do the kids need, what does our school need, what does our community need, and looking at that at more of a continuous, as more of a continuous process rather than, well, new accountability data is up, so what are we going to do to respond to that? And from there, we then make one district-wide plan, and then our different schools start to think about how do we support that plan with what we're doing in our buildings. And so you might end up with strategies that are something that all of your buildings are doing, or you might end up with strategies that your elementaries are doing that are different from what your secondary buildings are doing. So there's lots of different ways to then figure out what is our part, what's my part, no matter what building I'm in, to help to meet this district-wide goal or goals that we have. And you can see that is kind of a back and forth arrow there. As we are putting those into place, that's new data that we can use to know if it's working. And we're going to talk a lot more about that on our monitoring and adjusting day. That's also really what makes this a more nonlinear process, is this whole idea of continuous improvement and continuous attention to whole child, whole school, and whole community data. And then as anybody that works in state and federal programs knows, this year was not a great example of how this will be an integrated process into Nexus. But I think that hopefully we can at least see that that's the direction that the state is heading with this. And well, I'm not super confident that it'll be working again as advertised just this year. That is something that we're moving toward and we'll be working toward for the future. To try to make that more of an integrated process so that we're not having two separate processes. So those are just a couple of different visual representations. This was kind of a way that in the past, it was a little bit more compliance driven, more linear, more reliant on accountability. And our new process is definitely has more of an emphasis on the whole child, whole school, whole community. We're trying to make this much more nonlinear and continuous, and also to make sure that it's something that is going to be really applicable to our districts and our schools. So I'd like to get into and start talking about team structures and team readiness a bit. And so I'd like to think of a lot of things on a continuum. I don't like to think of things necessarily in absolutes, like our team is either ready or it's not, right? So really like to think of things more on a continuum. And so on this continuum, kind of over on that left side, that is more of it. We have a new team. We have new leadership. There might have been kind of some turnover in central office at our district. We've had that school-based process, and maybe we're still kind of embedded in that school-based process. And then maybe haven't participated much in MICIP PD or the learning around that in the last few years, and haven't been engaged in some of the systems work going on in the state, maybe such as from the school-wide field team or the MyMTSS team. So those might be some teams that would be over on that side of the continuum. And then way over on the other side is that here's where we have some really well-established teams. Leadership is really on board and embedded into those teams. We have district-based goals and strategies, and a lot of solid understanding about the shifts that we talked about on the previous slide that MICIP has brought. And maybe already we're working on really well-aligned goals that were on a 3 to 5 year cycle and have been embedded in a lot of systems work and improvement. So kind of a wide variety of things from one end to the other there. And what I'd like to do is, if you're comfortable with this, I'm going to put up that if we put this on a 1 to 10 scale of readiness in the chat, if you feel comfortable, maybe just give an indicator of where do you think that you are on this readiness continuum. Do you feel like you're more kind of getting started on putting your teams together? Or where in between there are you all the way up to having some really well-established and operational teams? So if you could go ahead and pop that in the chat, I'd really appreciate it. All right, so I'm seeing quite a range here. So a couple of ones. I believe that I saw a 10 pop up. So that is awesome. Hopefully whoever that was could maybe, as we're going through this, can maybe pop a few pointers in the chat. But I would say if I had to do my very unscientific reading of this, I'm thinking maybe a 4 to 6 kind of in the middle is maybe the average. So yeah, I think that we're going to have, we'll definitely be able to help for those of you that are in that 1 to 3 range. I think that we're going to have some materials today that will really help you jumpstart that right away. And for those of you that are at the higher end of the range, there's some really great materials out now that would really help to tune that and get you to maybe even some new levels that we're going to talk about today. So I think that this is really a foundational piece to this whole continuous improvement process. This is a team-based approach, and you really need to have solid district team and solid building teams. So let's dig into that a little bit. So the first thing that I want to talk about are some resources that were put together by the MICSI team. And if there's anybody here that's on MICSI, my hat's off to you. These are some really fantastic resources. And so I'm going to pop over to the dashboard, and I want to talk through each one of those resources a little bit. So the first one I want to look at is here under this pre-work section, is this whole piece about district-led continuous improvement. So we're going to do a quick overview of each of these. We're not going to go over them in detail. There's another opportunity to do that I'll talk about here in a minute. But this first one is about district-led continuous improvement. And I'm just going to pop over to the table of contents on here. And this document really gets into a lot of the things that we just talked about with making that switch from school level improvement plans to district level improvement plans. And then also how to get out of that, what they call the culture of isolation, and get into a culture of collaboration. And what was really great about all of these documents is they're very succinct. They're only about 6 to 8 pages long, but they are really packed with some great content, links to other resources, and they have a lot of nice self-assessment tools in them. And so for this one, I just wanted to come down and look at this shift from a culture of isolation to a culture of collaboration. And so earlier I asked to kind of do that rating on a 1 to 10 scale. This is something that is available to kind of take a look at to see this puts a little detail to that 1 to 10 scale. And so it goes from beginning, developing, evolving, and up to accomplished or collaborative. And so it's not necessarily something that I would recommend like plunking in front of your team and saying, let's rate ourselves and, kind of go back to that 40 indicators kind of idea. But it's really what I usually like doing is looking in that accomplished category and say, where do we need to be? And then start to think about where are we right now with this? And then what can we do to get there? And so this is a really great self-assessment tool when it comes to this whole concept of shifting to district-led continuous improvement. The next document that I wanted to look at under team resources here is called Forming a Team. And this one is all about exactly what the title says, getting your team going. And if you were a 1 through a 3 on our scale, this document is for you. So like I mentioned, it's about 8 pages long. And you can see right from the table of contents here, it has all the different pieces from why do you want to have a team, how to get an identity, who should be on the team, what it means to be a high functioning team. And there's some amazing resources in here that really get into, they have activities for them. So you're able to get in and you can do these different teams with the different activities with the teams that you're putting together. And so again, just some really great resources. And for this one, there's a great table here about how to move from low functioning to high functioning. And again, these are some great things for doing some self-assessment and kind of really finding wherever your team might be right now, and being able to get to the next level for whatever you have going on. And then the last CSI document here is called Leading and Managing Change. And I would say that this would be a great resource for those teams that were higher up on our scale earlier. Those 6, 7, 8, 9 teams. this can really help you kind of bring that to the next level. And it's really about creating a culture of change and understanding what it means to have real systemic change. And just a really great resource with great activities that you can do with your team. And there's PowerPoints and there's video recordings and all kinds of great stuff here. And in this, I think there was one last, nope. There's just a lot of really great resources. I was thinking there was another self-assessment in here, but that was just in the other two. So just one technical thing that I would say about all of these, I found that if I'm in a web browser like I am right now, and I click the links, it won't open those links. It just kind of stays in the web browser. So if you're having that difficulty, you might just have to download the PDF. And if you open it in Acrobat, all those links will work and they'll link out to anything. So if you're clicking things and it's not going anywhere, try downloading it and clicking the links from the downloaded file. So these are just some amazing resources. And I just think that I think they're great, and I'm trying to get them in front of as many people as I possibly can. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about here is this comes from one of those resources, and we're going to do a breakout here in a little bit. And when we do, I think this would be a great document to kind of have open. And if you recall earlier, I said that our process has really shifted to a district level, a district focused process that also needs to have building teams. And this document really kind of breaks out what are the functions or responsibilities of your building team? What are those functions and responsibilities of your district team? And then how do those two teams collaborate to enact continuous improvement? And I just think that this is a great document. It came out of those MyCSI resources, but I wanted to call this one out specifically because this is, I think, the spot to go. Again, if you're really working on those teams and you're either getting them started or you want to get them tuned up, this handout here is, I think, probably the one that really stuck with me the most as I was going through all those different documents. I wanted to pause just for a minute, one, to see if there's anybody here that has accessed these documents before, and if so, how did you use those with your team? So just want to pause and just see if that's the case. If that's not, we'll go ahead and move on. But if anybody's seen these documents before, love to hear how they may have used them. And also, if you are on MyCSI, if there's anything that I missed that you'd like to call out, I'd welcome you to do that at this time as well. Melissa said she's going to be using them this afternoon. Great. Yep, they're a great resource. I think your team will appreciate it.
Just one thing, Dave, to point out, I'm one of the creators of some of these tools, is that there is, if you're a school and you have no access to a facilitator, it's built to where you can do it. But it's also suggested as sometimes somebody from the outside looking in that doesn't have any bias to currently what's going on in your system's work, that can be very effective for having an outside perspective facilitate your teams as you're going through any of these resources.
Thanks, Mike. All right, I'm going to go on and share a couple other resources here. So this next, the next item that I have here under our pre-work is team-based leadership audit. And this came out of Macomb ISD. And I can't remember where this was shared, but I thought it was pretty great. If for those of you that are working through your MTSS processes or are maybe working with my MTSS, you'll know that the MTSS practice profile, the first component of the practice profile is team-based leadership. And this is just a really great document that breaks down all of the different components of team-based leadership from the MTSS practice profile. And it provides a kind of a self-assessment tool for you. And I'm a big fan of looking at current state and future state. And so this does a really great job with that. So basically it will say, here's the component, and the first component under team-based leadership is that the district creates and maintains a team and ensures its authority and responsibility for leading and coordinating the MTSS process. And a lot of this is going to talk about MTSS, but I think that it's just perfect for your continuous improvement teams, whether you're talking about your district team or your building teams. And so then it gets into and talks about the different components there. And then basically it says, what's your current state? What's our current reality? What's your desired state, or where do you want to get to? And then what's the first step that you're going to do to get there? And this is just a really great tool. You don't have to work through it top to bottom or anything like that. But if there's one specific thing that your team is working on, again, for maybe some of those more established teams, you can always find something to improve on. And this one can help you to think about those different pieces. So really component one of this is that you have a team. Component two is that that team is made up of key stakeholders and that somebody that is there from leadership that has authority to make decisions. The third component is commitment to professional learning. The fourth component is about how that team communicates. So how teams communicate between each other, how those teams then communicate to everybody that's affected by that, whether it's staff or families or students. And then the fifth component is a formal process to break barriers. And I really see the district team as that place where we actively work to break the barriers that have been raised by our district teams. A lot of times people will say, well, what's the main role for that district team? And that's one of those main roles, is to be able to break those barriers that are raised. This document does a great job of helping you assess where you are with your team. Again, it's something to get into more detail around what we had talked about earlier with that 1 to 10 scale that we did, that we just kind of did that affectively, but this gives us some objective measures to start to think a little bit more about that. Okay, so I think that was all of the resources I wanted to share right at that point. And so again, all of those are linked right in our dashboard, and I highly recommend looking through those and thinking about how you might be able to use those with your teams. A few additional things that I wanted to talk about in this pre-work, and that is one of the main tenets of MICIP is really just try to think about things systemically. And I put the definition of systems here. So it's that series of interdependent aligned processes, and it's people working together toward that common goal to bring the desired results. And there are several frameworks of systems out there. I listed just a few of them here. So we have the MyExcel blueprint, or the school-wide field team. And then MyMTSS is another example of that. And I just shared a resource from that, formerly called MyBlissy. And MICIP is more of a national organization around that, that's being worked at the state level. We have Cognia or other accreditation pieces. There's lots of different examples, but really trying to think about things systemically and how all the different pieces of our organization fit together to move toward meeting our goals. That's really systems work. And becoming more systematic is definitely one of the outcomes that we would like to see happen through the work of our collaboration series here that we're engaged in right now. And I mentioned earlier that really that whole child, the whole school and whole community is definitely the sorts of data that we're going to be wanting to look at, and the mindset that we want to get in around our continuous improvement work. And you're probably familiar with this graphic. This is that WISC model, and there's a lot of great resources about this and those sorts of things. But this center circle here, the safe, engaged, supported, challenged, healthy, safe, engaged, supported, challenged is really great. The whole concept is really based off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's really good reading, and a lot of really things that really will engage you in trying to think about data a little bit differently, which we're going to talk about here next. And all of this is really to be looked at in an environment of equity. And when we talk about equity, we're talking about three kinds of equity. We want to have equity of opportunities, equity of environments, and equity of supports. And we will talk about equity in a couple of other places, but something that's not maybe readily apparent from looking at the graphic, as the whole piece really should be grounded in this idea of equity of opportunities, equity of environments, and equity of supports. So the next part of this pre-work time, so really before you can even get started on the whole MICIP process, is all about data readiness and availability. And so this is where we really start to think about what are the types and sources of whole child data that are available to your team to do this work. If you've been really previously grounded in basing things off of your state assessment data or accountability data, it can be a little daunting to try to think about what are some sources of whole child data. And then getting into these other questions here. How often are we collecting that data? And then, of course, if we're collecting it, we need to be reviewing and acting on it. And so what are our processes to do that? And this is where a lot of that systems work really comes in handy. So before I dig into a couple of resources around this, I want to take a minute and in chat, see if we could get some people to put a couple of examples in. What are some examples of whole child data that your team has been considering kind of outside that normal realm of accountability type data? What are some things that your teams have been looking at? I'll pause there to see if we can get some responses in chat. U of M connected a study, great. Got the Sabres, a lot of MiFi, quite a bit of Swiss. Panorama and Aperture. Ooh, I'm not familiar with those. I need to hear a little bit more about that.
That's exactly what I was thinking when I saw that.
If you were one of the Panorama or Aperture people, could you put a quick blurb in the chat or maybe a link to something? A lot of TFI. Surveys, perception data, right? Yep. Okay, behavior assistance team. So I hear what Dina's saying is they're using the data that they're collecting from the work that their teams are doing. That's really, that's a lot of things we might call process data. It's great stuff. Local assessment data through FastBridge, okay. Great. So these are all really excellent examples. And it's really just kind of trying to get at, I saw behavioral examples there. I saw a lot of affective type pieces. I saw health, wellness data. Obviously, there was some perception data was in there. Panorama is a survey instrument around student voice. Oh, nice. A lot of stuff around digging into diversity with that as well, Jennifer mentioned. So it's an SEL survey, right? Okay, awesome. Have to look into that a little bit more. If anybody has a good link to any resources on Panorama, if you want to drop those in that resource repository, that'd be a great spot to put that if anybody's interested in looking a little bit more at that.
Let me put that link in the chat so it'll save some people some time.
Thank you. Tom put a link to the Aperture as well. Okay, yeah, so these are some really great examples. And so in my mind, I started immediately categorizing them in my head into these into this 4 types of data. And so I'm just going to open this link up here. And if you've been doing continuous improvement work, you've probably heard of and read and followed Victoria Bernhardt. If not, I recommend you looking her up. That's just some amazing resources. So really this data kind of falls into these 4 categories. So we have multiple measures of student learning. And so we saw a lot of that. We saw, Fast Bridge and NWEA and things like that. Obviously even our state assessment would fall into that category. So that'd be a little bit more summative. So student assessment data, obviously student learning data or student outcome data is a huge subject in and of itself. And then one thing that I didn't hear a lot about in there was around demographic data. But that is just really kind of understanding your school and your school community, comes out through demographic data. And then programs and processes, that was a lot of the things where we heard from, we're learning this from our teams, and this is the work that our teams are doing. A lot of that comes out of process data. The tiered fidelity inventory that was mentioned there might be considered process data. If people are moved through this this team-based item that I showed earlier, that might be process data. Okay, so the 40 and 90 indicators that we used to do, that would be process data. And then perception, obviously that was something that came up quite a bit, and we learned about a new one today. Well, I learned about a new one today around panorama. that would be another source of perception data. And so this would just be a document that you could use to really try to think about what are all those sources of whole child data that we're collecting, and kind of seeing, do we have a good sampling of out of each of these categories. It's not to say that you might not have more in one category than another. You don't need to have a perfect balance or anything like that. But if you got in here and realized, we're really not collecting any perception data, that would be a great, or maybe we're just collecting it once a year and it's just from our teachers, or it's just from our parents. So this would be a place to try to look to and see, just do an inventory. What are we collecting? And where might we strengthen our knowledge around all of this whole child stuff to better inform our plans. So just kind of wrapping up this whole pre-work section. One of the things that we talk about anytime that we talk about MICIP is the platform is the tool, and the tool can't do the work for you. And this whole idea of forming a team, having the right mindset on the team, having access to the right kinds of data, this is all stuff that has to really happen. It's really foundational, and it has to happen outside the platform. And it's just the platform's not going to be able to do it for you. And so having a well-functioning team that has access to the right kinds of data to make the right kinds of decisions was really what this whole pre-work section was all about. So what the recommendation here is, if some of these aren't in place for you right now, so if you're a 1 or a 2, really take the time to really dig into this stuff and learn more about this so before you move forward with the whole process. It's going to really help to move everything along really well. A couple of additional resources to talk about here. The MICIP process guide, which I haven't mentioned yet, is an excellent resource. It's listed down here under our general resources, right here, the MICIP process guide. This is just a huge amount of work went into creating the process guide. I'm not even going to open it up right now. It's hundreds of pages long. We'll make specific references to some of the pages as we go along, because just to call out some of those specifics that are in there. But if you haven't used or referenced the MICIP process guide before, it's very, very handy, and I'd recommend taking a look at that. I'll also put a plug in for the continuous improvement monthly checklist from the SI timeline. This kind of goes through, and a lot of times people are like, I just want to know what I'm supposed to do at the beginning of the year, or it's October, what am I supposed to be doing around continuous improvement? And so this really kind of digs into that, and will give you a lot of different things to think about each month. It doesn't mean that you need to start at the top and work your way to the bottom through every one of the bullet points, but this is it's a great resource, especially if you're just getting started and kind of thinking about where should I be. It's February. What should be going on in February? Well, there's a February section. So again, don't need to work through everything top to bottom in this, but I think it's a great resource, and something that you can reference on a monthly basis as you're preparing for your team meetings. And Mike had a big hand in developing this. Mike, wanted to see if there's anything that you might add about this resource.
Yeah, I would say that there's some more detail here. Like if you don't even have a common agenda template, there's an example in there. There's roles about who could be on that team. It kind of defines that. So it kind of gets a little bit more into the weeds than the big picture resources do. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're really looking for that type of resource, you'll find almost everything linked somewhere between June through July of a full year on that SI timeline.
All right, I think we covered all of that pre-work stuff. Got the data inventory. All right, I think we're ready to move on to our next section. Anything pop up in chat that we might need to catch up on before we move on to the next spot?
I did not, but I do want to encourage some of those surveys, even if they're common or not. I asked one of somebody that I know to give a little description about that panorama, if I'm getting the name right. Please go ahead and add those in there, because those could be valuable for other districts to tap into, especially if they're free. I don't know if the cost is there or not, but those could be very valuable for getting non-academic data.
I did add both the panorama and the aperture to the repository with the link. So if you want to explore, it looks like aperture there is a cost for it because it talks about getting a quote. But I mean, if it's something worth investing in, I see some nods in there. So, but
Thanks,
you have
Linda.
access to them. Panorama's not for you as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Of course, yeah, too good to be true, but that's okay. That's okay. Like I said, it's if your district is looking for a resource, I'll plug Cognia. I mean, we are Cognia approved accredited district, so I know in Dearborn that's something that we access and utilize. So there's many of them out there. It's just knowing what you need to use. So.
All right, we will go ahead and move on to our next section. So we are going to move into process a bit here, and we're going to talk about the Discover Data section of MICIP. And these are all the steps that happen when we're in the Discover Data section. At the end of the day today, we're going to kind of talk about what does this Discover Data section mean once it's actually done. So a lot of us did this last year when we did made our first MICIP goal. And so what's our role to work on this now? And we're going to get to that. But right now it's just a little bit of a walkthrough for this section. So the first step in Discover Data is where we identify an area of inquiry. And the way that I really like to think about this whole area of inquiry piece is what's really different about MICIP is, in this process, this continuous improvement process, is you can really base it around what is it that we're interested in working on in our district. And so when you get in there and you're and you're starting the process and you're like, okay, let's discover some data and those sorts of things, it's really what you're trying to do is you're trying to get at what's something that we're interested in that we think that we could do better. And so instead of starting off with, we need to improve student achievement, it's really you're trying to have an inquiry around whatever that might be, whether it was math or English or whatever. And of course, our areas of inquiry can be in non-academic areas or systems as well. And so when you first start, you really have to start to think about, is this an academic inquiry? That's going to kind of guide some of the data that you might need. Is this more non-academic? Are we working on student wellness or behavior or those sorts of things? Then that would be something that we're going to want to collect data around that. Finally, it's systems. You might want to be improving the way that some things work in your district. And then I would say that's going to have some different kinds of data. So when you're going into it, it's important to kind of think about what is it that we're going into here? What kind of data might we need? And each area of inquiry turns into one goal. So there's like this one-to-one correspondence. An area of inquiry at the end becomes one goal. And so if you're going through that area of inquiry and you end up finding out that you're interested in multiple things, that might end up being multiple goals. So, but there's kind of this one-to-one correspondence. Area of inquiry turns into a goal. So that's just something to kind of really understand as you're getting into it. And one of the first things that you'll do when you come in here is you're making a data story, and that data story becomes the goal. And you need to name it, and then you need to pick a focus area. Is it going to be academic, non-academic, or systems? So one of the questions that I get quite a bit is, well, I'm not sure where this is headed, or if I click this, is that going to limit something later? And it does not limit it. It does not limit it at all. So it really just says, this is what we think that we're going to be digging into a little bit. And so if you said that you're doing systems work around communication, and then it ended up being more of an affective goal around improving behavior in the district, like this isn't going to limit you in any way to do that. So Jennifer said, can we give an example of an academic inquiry? So sure. So an example here might be that with academics, you might say, we're looking at our local student assessment data, and we noticed that the students are not at the they're not at the level that we would hope that they would be at by the middle of the year. And so then you would want to, you could make a whole data story just about that. So an academic inquiry would be looking at and discovering data around that phenomenon. You could be really specific and say that English language arts or those sorts of things, or you could even get more specific than that, down to comprehension. But the more specific you make it, the more you kind of tie yourself down to what kind of strategies you might have. So a lot of times people make their academic inquiries broader. How are we going to improve our outcomes around English language arts, rather than how are we going to improve our phonemic awareness outcomes? So a lot of times we'll make them more broad, and then we can get more specific at the strategy level, which we'll talk about later. Jennifer, I hope that was the question you were asking. So we talked about here the discover the data and discovering the whole child data. And so this kind of gets at what data is really interesting and informative for your area of inquiry. And so we talked about earlier that data comes in those 4 forms: that perception data, the process data, demographic data, and student learning data. And so we now have this opportunity to really think about data differently. And we had a lot of really great examples in the chat where before it was like, well, the new state that, the MICIP back in the day, or the MICIP data was out, ACT data, SAT data. And so now we have that opportunity to really think about that data differently. So we already did this part. I did this a little bit earlier than I had originally thought. But how do we really get that data in MICIP? Really, when we put stuff into MICIP, it really becomes anything that you put into MICIP becomes a historical record that you can build on when you're monitoring and adjusting. And we're going to talk a lot about that on day 3. And another reason that you would want to put your data in MICIP is it becomes one place to review all the data all in one spot around whatever your area of inquiry is. And then a very practical reason to put the data in MICIP is those uploaded pieces of data, you're going to tie those to end targets and interim targets. And so we'll talk about that later. But if you, let's say you didn't upload any data and you went through this whole process, when you got to setting a goal, it would say, what's your end target? And you need to tie that back to a piece of data. And so it's really important that that you upload multiple pieces of data here and think about what on here do we want to improve on, because that you're going to actually write your end targets about that later. So that'll come full circle when we get to that section. There are lots of ways that you can put data into the system. So right now there's My School Data integration, and it integrates with a really good amount of stuff in My School Data. I have to say it's not very whole childy, if that's a word. You can get your student assessment data in there, and obviously we don't have a lot of really reliable state assessment data right now. So you can get that in there. Probably the most useful thing that you can get in there right now would be around a lot of your demographic data. So you can use my school data and it integrates and you can pull it straight in. You don't have to go out and download reports and then re-upload them and that sort of thing. You can just integrate them. If you subscribe to IDEX or Munetrics, those both integrate now. And you have quite a bit of possibility. I'm a Munetrics subscriber, so I can talk a little bit more about that. I have subscribed to IDEX in the past, but currently I'm a Munetrics subscriber. And you are able to, if you are uploading your local assessment data, if you're uploading your process data, if you are uploading your perception data into Munetrics, you can integrate that all straight into MICIP through the application. It's I was surprised at how well it worked. The same would go for IDEX. I know that you can put a lot of local assessment data and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if they do perception or process data in IDEX yet, but Munetrics has all those pieces integrated. And if you're using those features, you're able to integrate them straight into MICIP. So I'm going to get into MICIP in a second. You actually have to turn that feature on. If you don't, then you won't even see it as an option. So I'm going to real quick show how to do that for people that have that capability. It'll just take 1 second. But like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the best sources of whole child data, you're probably going to have to just manually put those in yourselves. And so that's another option. You can use My School Data, you could use IDEX or Munetrics if you're subscribed to that, or you can upload your own data. And a lot of times if we're given surveys and those sorts of things, maybe we're using Google Forms. And so you can PDF the results, you can upload them, you can take the reports from MiFi that really worked for you, and you can upload those reports. So you'll probably find that uploading the data is going to be what you do the most. And I just put on here about maybe staying away from the kitchen sink approach. So don't upload your entire MiFi report. That's probably not going to be very helpful. There's 275 reports in that entire MiFi report. Which part of the MiFi was really interesting to you? And just upload that report. What part of this do you want to make an improvement on? Just upload that piece of it. Don't upload your entire NWEA output. Which one of the graphs are you going to upload and put in there? And so those are really the things to think about. You can always go back and add more data. So if you get to your end targets and you're like, oh, it'd really be great if we could track this, you can go back and you can put more in there. So I'm not, you're just kind of trying to find the balance of what's going to be informative without being overwhelming is, I think, the key here. Mike also pointed out that you can upload PDFs or JPEGs into MICIP right now. So it's not like you could take a spreadsheet and upload the spreadsheet and then analyze the spreadsheet in MICIP. You'd have to, if you had a spreadsheet of data, you'd want to PDF it and then upload it. All right, I think, yes. All right, and we're going to pop over and get into MICIP right now. And I'm going to actually log into the Muskegon area ISD's MICIP. And I thought at first I thought, oh, I'll go into the training site and I'll make a bunch of fake stuff. And I thought, you know what? I have real stuff already made. So, so I'm not going to say that this is that you should do it exactly like we did it, because everybody can really approach us differently. But I'm going to go ahead and show you what we did at our ISD. Okay, so I'm at the ISD level, so my MICIP screen is going to look maybe a little bit different from yours, but I promised that I was going to show you guys how to enable Munetrics or IDEX. So this would only be for MICIP administrators, so I know this only is going to apply to some people, but I promise it's really short. So
Dave,
if you got in,
can I make a suggestion? Can you enlarge your screen just a little bit?
Yes, thank you. Better? All right. So if you're a MICIP administrator, if you come up here, you'll have a thing that says administrator settings. And so if we go there and you go to third-party integrations, then you just would click on which one you have. So do you have IDEX or do you have Munetrics? If you don't have either one, it just won't do anything. But all I did was I just clicked the word Munetrics and it changed from inactive to active, and then it worked. So hopefully your experience is the same there. So anyway, that was just a quick thing about how to enable that if it's not there. So this is the main screen that that you'll see when you log on, and you'll see that at my organization we have one data story going right now, and so at our ISD we have 4 special education programs. We have a countywide emotionally impaired program. We have a severely multiply impaired program. We have a adult transitions program, and we also run a adjudicated youth program through the courts. So we have these 4 programs, and I got all of the programs together, and I said, and we started with just kind of what we talked about today. What are we interested in getting better around? So those programs are all very different, just like your schools are all different. But we were able to talk about that, and we said, you know what, I think that we would just all be better if we had really good data and systems and processes in place. And so that was our area of inquiry. You know, we wanted to say, what are we doing around data and systems? How might that improve what we're doing as we move forward? And so that's what we made. We made a data story around data and systems. And when we got in here, this is where you would, this is where you put your data. And so I could come over here to say add data. And as you can see, I have 3 options. Everybody's going to have my school data. Everybody's going to have upload district data. And then if you're a Munetrics or an IDEX subscriber and you enable it, then you'll have Munetrics or IDEX. Okay. If for some reason you subscribe to both, you could probably put both on there. Haven't tried that out myself. And like I said, the one that you might use the most, especially with our whole child data, is this upload district data piece. I'm not going to go into a lot of technical details about how do you do MICIP, how do you do Munetrics. This is kind of more overview day, so we're not really going to dig into that. If that's something that's needed later, please put it in the feedback, because our 4th day, we're keeping it kind of open for what's needed. So if you really need a lot of detail about how to do this stuff, make sure you put that in our feedback today. Today's just a little overview though. So what we did was we actually used all of our local data, and we uploaded that. And so what we did was we uploaded our determinations data that really showed that we weren't doing enough around our, we weren't doing enough technically around our IEP processes. And so we knew that if we were able to dig into our data a little bit better, we could improve on that. And then for each of our campuses, we uploaded their targeted technical assistance report, and that really gave them a rating about where they were with their systems and processes around special education delivery. And so we uploaded that data, just pop that open so you can kind of just see. If you upload something, it just comes in as a PDF, and you can kind of see the whole thing. So this has all of our different ratings in it and those sorts of things. So this, for us, it showed us right where we were right now with data that was important to us. And it gave us a space to say, well, this is where we want to improve. We want to move from not met to met, right? So this is so as you'll see later, these documents then tie to our end targets that we're trying to make. So those are a couple of things to kind of think about with the data that you're uploading. So that's really how to get the data in. You start your data story. You say if it's in academics or systems or non-academics, and then ours was a systems goal. Okay, so this is an example of a systems goal. And then you add data just by clicking the add data button, and just put the data in that's important to you, that you think is going to help to move you forward on the work that you're doing. Let's see. Okay, so we went into MICIP. We kind of saw how that worked. So then from there, there's 5 different questions that MICIP's going to guide your team through. And I really recommend not doing this in MICIP. So when you're having your meeting, I wouldn't sit there with MICIP open and say, what do you guys think about this? And then type it in. I do not recommend that at all. What I recommend instead is that you use a collaboration document to do that. So we're all pretty used to working in Google Docs. Multiple people can add, multiple people can do those sorts of things. And hopefully MICIP can get to a space someday that it's as accessible. But for right now, there's a really great document that was developed out of Ottawa ISD that has the whole process in it. And then they have screenshots of what each of those pages look like. And it gives you the opportunity to answer the questions in this collaborative Google Doc. And then that way you don't have to worry about overwriting each other, or the computer going down, MICIP logging you out, any of those sorts of things. And so anytime that I've worked with a team, whether it's my own team or a team that I'm helping to support, we always use a collaboration document, and we always work in the collaboration document. It doesn't have to be this one. There's lots of different versions of it out there. I like this one because it shows you what the actual screen is going to look like when you go in and add that into MICIP. And so the first question that's asked is, what did the data tell you, and what patterns and trends did you see across the data objects? And so right in here, you can kind of type up your summary, and then eventually they'll take that summary and you can paste it into MICIP. And so so that's what this first one is really asking about. Summarize the data summarize the story that the data is telling you. And really what we're doing is we're just trying to describe the data set. And so what I always try to do is try to capture the conversations we're having around it. And we're really trying to keep it factual. So you might see things like 57% of the students in the survey responded blank, or 30% of the girls and 53% of the boys scored blank. So it's really you've probably all heard or tried to make data statements before. This is a really great spot for those data statements. And kind of keeping with that, don't try to do the kitchen sink piece, is don't try to capture every single piece of data at this point. We're really just trying to focus on what you found that was interesting. And there's some really great examples of this in the MICIP process guide. And so what we did for our location was we kind of analyzed the different pieces of data that we had available for us at each of our different programs. And so we talked about what were the pieces of data, and then what were we getting out of those pieces of data. So we're trying to make a systemic goal here for our organization. So after you're done with that initial data analysis, then it's a time to think about what are all the things that we're putting in place right now around this area. And that is the initial initiative inventory analysis. And there's some really great resources about this. One is from NERN and MICIP, which is an initiative inventory process. And there's also some really good consideration questions right in that collaboration document that I showed you earlier. So, so right here under this initial inventory analysis, these are the questions that you can really kind of talk through with the team. Also, like I said, there's a whole document here that really goes into what is it, why would we want to do an inventory analysis, what roles do we have, how do you complete it? And they have some great questions here to ask. I found that this is a really, really important step, and I don't suggest trying to kind of breeze through this step. It's really saying, what are we already doing about all of this stuff? What's already in place? And you kind of start to lead into questions like, is that working for us? And are there any of these that we can kind of maybe abandon? Is there anything that and really this is what that whole process is about. It's trying to get the data that you need to make the decisions that you need to move forward. So again, we're cruising through these pretty quick. This is just a nice overview of this whole section. After that, you would create a gap statement. And so the gap statements really talks about how far are we from where we want to be. And this is a great place to talk about current state and future state. So earlier we talked about current state and future state around our teams. You can talk about that with any of your data. Here's where we are now. Here's where we want to be. It doesn't necessarily need to be about achievement gaps. A lot of times when we talk about gap statements, the first thing that comes to mind is achievement gaps. So the boys scored this, but the girls scored this. Our economically disadvantaged students scored this, and our non-economically disadvantaged students scored this. That's not necessarily what this means. You can certainly put things in there like that, but what's the gap? Where do you want to be, and how far away from that are you right now? Again, this was kind of what we had here. So I'll just read one of these from here. So it said, one of our schools said, we currently have a lot of academic data pieces, but we're realizing that we may be data rich, information poor. Our desired state would be a streamlined data collection system with efficient data collection tools, which provide us with reliable, effective, and valid information to make informed decisions. So I can look at that and say, oh, I think I know where this team wants to go with this inquiry. And that's really what you're shooting for. You notice that they didn't say things about like, our boys scored this, our girls scored this, right? They're really trying to make a gap statement around what their problem is. So finally, you get to the end of this and you make a summary. So basically, this is where you just think about all the previous conversations that you had about it, when you summarized the data, when you did an inventory analysis, when you made a gap statement, and you just overall say, what is going on? What's our story right now? And by kind of summarizing things here, it really enables you to do the next step that we're going to talk about after we do a little collaboration activity and take a break. So really this data story, when you summarize your piece here, it really just kind of says what's everything that we've talked about and considered so far. Going to do a quick check-in on our dashboard. Both of the resources that we talked, or all of the resources that we talked about so far, are in the Discover Data section. So there was that initiative inventory toolkit. There was the NERN and CISEP, CISEP initiative inventory process. And then down under our general resources, the MICIP guided collaboration document. Those were all the different resources that we talked about here in this section. So I'm going to pause there just to see if there was anything that came up in the chat from, or Mike or Hilda, if there's anything that you would add.
Dave, I didn't see anything pop up in the chat. Before you give the instructions on break, I'm just going to give a general link to that document you alluded to earlier about teamings, about desired state and current state. That will help guide those questions that you're going to explain in just a moment.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording at this point while we just kind of go over the directions for the breakout room. Anybody watching this later will not need those. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. All right, I think we're back. And pardon me, technical difficulties here. Suddenly everybody's videos went away. Normally I would say, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, but I can't see anybody.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We can hear and see you. You're good.
All right, I'm going to go with that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move into the next section, which is root cause analysis. So just kind of continuing our overview of the MICIP process. So we're going to talk about what is root cause. There's two different things built into MICIP to look at root cause, and then there's an add your own option. So we'll talk about all of those, and also kind of how to use multiple tools all together. So, oh, hey, everybody popped back. Hey, everybody. All right. So let's go ahead and dig into the root cause piece. So what root cause really tries to do is it tries to think about what are the causal factors, or what's behind the thing that you're studying. A lot of times we focus on needs, right? We're in this mindset of we need to do a needs assessment. We're going to assess our needs. We're going to find an area of deficit. We're going to really focus on that. There's a whole different philosophy that if you haven't considered it before, I would suggest maybe thinking about or looking into a little bit, is this whole idea of appreciative inquiry, where you really think about what is going really well for us and digging into why that is going so well so it can be replicated. So just know that you don't always have to take this deficit-based approach. You can really focus on the assets as well. And you can really use this root cause to figure out what is going well. So it's really just trying to find the causal factors behind it whether it's going well or if it's something that you need to kind of build up and strengthen. What the root cause does is you're trying to get at what was that primary factor, what was the main thing that's really contributing to either the challenge or the opportunity. And then, so it's the why, right? And there's a great quote from one of my favorite books about improvement. That's this book, Learning to Improve, that I have screenshotted there, by Breich and et al. When the authors in that book really talk about trying to get down to the root cause or trying to think about causal factors, the thing to remember is that whatever you come up with is possibly wrong and definitely incomplete. So this is really something to really think about and dig into. And if you're identifying that there's a problem and you are trying to figure out the solution, you really want to think about what's the root of the problem, but you need to be aware that these are your own perceptions. You're going to bring in your own biases and your own, your own history into that, which is another really important reason to have a team working on this. So I can't talk about root cause without talking about ladders of inference. We're going to start at the bottom of the ladder here. And when you're making an inference about something, then you're really starting with all the available data about that thing. And so you're going to select the data that's important to you, paraphrase the data, and name what's happening. And I hope that this is ringing a bell for what we just talked about with data discovery, right? So these first few steps on the ladder are everything that we just did in data discovery, right? We thought about it, oh gosh, what's our problem? I wonder what kind of data we might have to be able to learn more about that. And so we're going to pick that data, we're going to upload the things, we're going to connect it through IDEX or My School Data. And then we go through that process of paraphrasing it and coming up with it. So that these first steps are really, everything on that bottom of that ladder is the first part of MICIP. So then you get to evaluating what's happening. And that's really what we're trying to do with the root cause. And so this is kind of another version of the ladder of inference. And the lower that you can stay down on the ladder, the less your biases start to work into it. And so, we start down here with reality and facts, and we kind of, as we work our way up, we start to think about what are our assumptions, and we make conclusions based on those assumptions and our beliefs, and that leads to action. And so really just making sure that you're involved in a team really helps to get a wide variety of perspectives on it, and to really keep yourself lower down on that ladder, right? And really trying to understand the different pieces that are happening. Then based off of that, then you're going to decide what to do. And that's kind of when we get into the goal setting and strategy selection and those sorts of things. So, but this is the step that we're at right now. We're really just trying to evaluate what's happening and why that's happening. And that's really what this whole root cause section is all about. One of the things that I can't remember what book I got this out of, but this book talked about solutionitis. And really that's where we're kind of always grasping at new things to try to fix whatever our ills are. And we're going to talk about this a lot more in our monitoring day as well. But really what identifying the root cause is we're trying to prevent that solutionitis. And so here's a couple of examples. So you might look at something and say, you know what, I think we just need a new benchmark assessment product. So let's go out and buy a new one. And so this is something that I see districts doing a lot. They just cycle through this stuff. It's like, well, I had NWA, but now we're going to go to iReady because I heard that's better. We tried iReady out, so let's try this other assessment system. And we're just going to ditch it all. We're going to make our own assessments, right? So like that's what I would call solutionitis. You're not getting the result you want, and so it's like, let's try something new. So if they were to do a root cause analysis, then they might have found that what they actually needed to do was establish an assessment team that actually would review and act on the student data. So without doing the root cause and really trying to get at the bottom of why they thought they needed a new assessment system, then they might have just kept cycling through these assessment systems and not really making any progress toward anything that they were actually hoping to do. And you can also do this in an area of strength. Okay, so like we talked about earlier with that appreciative inquiry. And so, you know, an observation that somebody might have made was, you know, our outcome data improved when we bought that new curriculum. And so maybe we should just buy a new math curriculum too, and then our outcomes will improve. But if they really dug into why things improved when they got the new curriculum, it was because they established coaching feedback cycles around that new curriculum. So maybe if they just established coaching cycles around their existing math curriculum, they wouldn't need to buy a new math curriculum too. So really that root cause, it really helps you kind of get to the bottom of it. I would say this is a, it's a difficult step because people want to, after kind of understanding their problem through doing the data discovery, they want to jump straight to the solutions. And this kind of forces you to pause and really try to think about what our assumptions are before getting in and thinking about what our solutions should be. And hopefully saving a lot of time of cycling through, in these examples, cycling through new curricula or cycling through new benchmark assessments. Okay, so what's in MICIP? So in MICIP, you have a couple of different options. You can do the fishbone diagram, you can do the 5 whys, or you can add your own. And so we're going to talk about each of those a little bit. So I'm going to start with the add your own. And there are a lot of resources out there about this. And so I'm going to pop over to our dashboard here and kind of talk about this just a little bit. So down here under root cause, it says see additional root cause resources under week 2 in video clips. So last year, Mike and Hilda and I and another colleague, Frank, ran this series for 4 days last year. And we had a really big chunk on this root cause. And we shared a whole bunch of different resources, and they're listed here. So if you're interested in what kind of other root cause resources are out there besides the fishbone or the 5 whys, we have several of them listed here. And the video from that day also really digs into this in a lot more detail than what we're doing today. So like, if you think that your team needs to know a little bit more about root cause, and you want more than what we're just talking about today, there's some great examples here. And the main session video also digs into all of those. And if you click the link from our dashboard, it will jump straight to the root cause section of what we talked about that day. So if you need more root cause, it's there. So I'm not going to really dig a ton into all the other things that you could do. I want to just know that you don't have to do the fishbone and you don't have to do the 5 whys. You might already have an existing process, or you might have tried those before and found that they weren't successful for your team. And so you can do anything else here that you want to do. And there's a lot of great resources for that. If you're already involved in systems work through my MTSS or the school-wide field team, they have great resources about how to deal with those different things. So don't feel like you have to do the fishbone or the 5 whys. But since they're in there and they're available to us, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about them today. And I just wanted to put a plug in for the resource repository. If you have a really great root cause process that you have enacted in your district that wasn't listed in some other places, then feel free to put those in the resource repository so other people could learn from those as well. Okay, so let's talk about fishbone diagrams. Just from a practical standpoint, if you're in MICIP, you can't actually fill out the fishbone diagram in MICIP. They basically just show you what a fishbone diagram looks like, and then they give you the opportunity to summarize the conversation that you had around the fishbone. So, we have, if you wanted to try to do a fishbone root cause analysis, then we have some links here for a fillable fishbone. We have a PDF version and a Google Doc version that you can open up, and your team can collaborate around those a little bit. But like I said, there's nothing like right in MICIP to actually do to fill out the fishbone. It gives you the option, and it gives you the option to summarize what you learned from it. So how do you do that? Well, the premise behind this is that, so if this was a fish and this were the head of the fish, you would take your problem statement or your data story summary, and you might put that in as the head of the fish. And then you think about what are the main drivers for whatever that story was. And then you kind of dig into the details on each of those drivers. So there's a couple different ways that you can figure out what those drivers are. One is that your team can brainstorm and think about what are the drivers. And you don't have to have 6. Okay, there's 6 in the example. I've seen people do fish bones that had 4 drivers. I've seen people that had 3. So you don't have to have 6. There's not anything magical about the number 6. I probably wouldn't want to go above that. Otherwise, you're going to have like a massive overload of detail. So, but you don't have to have 6. So the team can really collaborate and decide about what were the main drivers for whatever the situation is. But there's also kind of some pre-made ones that are applicable to almost any situation. And those are called causal categories. And so they're listed here: infrastructure, leaders, curriculum, instruction, teachers, and students. And this document kind of goes into that a little bit further. So it gives some examples about what those causal categories might be. And then you can see that here's a different version of a fishbone at the bottom, where they took those drivers and they just put those at the very ends of the fish bones. And then you would say, okay, so what about our instruction might be contributing to this factor? What about our curriculum might be contributing to this factor, right? So that's what these causal categories do. They really help you kind of start the conversation around figuring out root cause. So this is an example of a district that was writing a social emotional goal. And basically, when they summarized their problem or they got through their data statements, they said, you know what, the school needs to better respond to student social, emotional, and health concerns. And so this school made their own drivers. They had lack of communication with parents, lack of family engagement, disjointed community supports, initiative overload, lack of professional learning, and concerns with how we engage students. Then under each of those different categories, they started to dig into, well, what were we feeling initiative overload about? Well, we have new curricular resources. We put a new SEL program into place. We're starting a new MTSS program. We have a new strategic plan this year, and we made the student health clinic. There's all this stuff going on, right? So this is just an example of kind of how you can take this, you can make your own drivers and put them on the outside, or like I mentioned, you can put these causal categories in. So from there, you can really zero in on an area, right? And this can become a new data source that you plug back into MICIP. So you can actually do the fishbone and the 5 whys if you want. And so, in fact, if you're going to do the 5 whys, I really recommend doing a fishbone first to think about all the things you might want to do, and then maybe pick one of those areas to dig into on the 5 whys, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But basically, what we did with this was we actually took this PDF and we went back to our data story and we uploaded it as a new, I'm just showing you where this would happen. It wasn't with this school, but you would just hit add data, and then we uploaded this actual, this PDF. So you can make the fishbone and you can actually turn that into a new data source right in MICIP if you want. Then you can use that fishbone to kind of decide what you're going to do for your 5 whys. So, so before I move on to talk a little bit more about 5 whys, I wanted to pause there just to see if there's any questions about fishbone. If anybody's used one before, what kind of experience did you have with it? It's definitely not for everybody. So if you used it and you didn't like it, I'd be interested to hear that as well. And then also just to see if Mike or anybody else had anything to add about fishbone before we move on and talk about 5 whys.
Just one thing to add, just start. It's going to be messy. It's going to be frustrating, but start somewhere and give it a go, and you'll get better over time as using any type of tool.
All right, not hearing any other conversation around that. I'm going to go ahead and talk about 5 whys. So Katie's talking about using the interrelationships diagram. Katie, would you mind unmuting and just talking a little bit about that?
Sure. So with the fishbone activity, what we did is we took like the number 1 from each one of the bones, and then we placed it into an interrelational diagram. And then we talked about the impact that each one of them has. And so we talked about the ins and outs related to one another. And then we focused on the one that had the most impact on the ins and outs to then drive our goal setting.
So did you you did this in conjunction with the whole MICIP process then, right?
Yes, with the fishbone activity.
Okay. So did you, did you kind of just summarize that in MICIP then, and then you use that to kind of move forward with the process? Or did you actually take that step of taking the fishbone and using that as a new data source in there, or?
So what we did is that the fishbone activity didn't really help us drive in, because we felt that a lot of those entities were really good pieces of it. And so we took those pieces that we felt, I think we took 5 of those indicators from the fishbone activity and then developed a circle, and then kind of seeing how they fit interrelational between each other. We took the fishbone activity a step further.
Got it. So that was kind of where you started, and that led to the rest of the process.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Great. And so I see Dina said that found the fishbone was valuable to use with building level teams, and then analyze to look for district-wide patterns and data. Absolutely, there are a lot of different ways to do this. And I think that, I don't think I mentioned this before, and I wish I had, is that these processes are supposed to work for you. So, so instead of saying, what am I supposed to do here? What does MICIP want me to do here? Like we had to do with assist all the time. That's not the question. Now it's like, what process is going to work for us? And then let's use that. And so I think what Katie just shared, and then also what Dina was talking about in there are 2 really great examples of that. They made the process work for them. Josh had a question for the whole group. And so if you could maybe respond in chat, or if somebody has a great example, I'd be glad to hear you unmute and say it. Has anyone done a root cause analysis, perhaps using the fishbone, to identify why something was working well, and perhaps with the thought of expanding or improving on those areas? So that's that appreciative inquiry piece. So if anybody has an example of that, I'd love to hear that in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute. Melissa, use the fishbone to determine what each system could contribute to the challenge statement. Oh, Melissa, would you be willing to unmute and tell a little bit more about that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we just, when we kind of looked at all of our data and came up with our challenge statement, we decided to put our systems all along the top and bottom of the fishbone, and then each of the bones were, how is it that those systems are contributing to our challenge? And then from there, that helped us determine what strategies we were going to do to then overcome those barriers, or those, what was contributing to the challenge.
Got it. So just another way to kind of customize that process, and for the sake of really trying to get to the bottom of why something is occurring. Yep, great example. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so Josh, I'm not seeing anybody chiming in about how they might have used this for more of an appreciative inquiry. So hopefully maybe somebody will get inspired by that, by some of the conversation that we've had today, to know that you don't just have to dig into problem statements. You can also dig into what's been successful. And if so, hopefully we can hear more about that as people get involved in that.
So Dave, we have a piggyback question from Carrie Ann to Melissa.
Okay.
is how did you define your systems, and could you define that further for us?
Sure. I used a document that is somewhere in all the MICIP resources that says what the systems are. I can find that here in my folder. Systems like administration, here I have right here, assessment and data, communication, curriculum and instruction, facilities management, finance, food service, HR/talent management, leadership, professional learning, student support, technology, and transportation. So when we did it with everyone sort of worked as a partner, they picked which systems, and then we did a final one as a whole group and came up with our district-wide fishbone.
So the list that Melissa just gave is, hold on, I can show you where that list is. Let's see here. So on when you make your data, when you first start your data story, that list that she just read off is right on the screen when you say, I'm going to start a new data story. That list that she just gave is right here. And so you can see that you could scroll it down and you'd get the whole rest of the list. So if you're looking somewhere for that list, it's right there. I think it's also in the process guide. I just couldn't tell you the exact page.
No, I didn't make it up myself.
You didn't just pull that one out of thin air?
I did not. I did not.
All right. All right. So thank you for everybody for kind of chiming in at that section. This is this root cause stuff is, like I mentioned at the start, it's easy to be like, oh, you know what, we know what the problem is, so let's just go ahead and start figuring out like the solutions for us. And I really encourage people to do your due diligence at this step. I think it's very important. So kind of getting off of the fishbone, the 5 whys is another process that is built into MICIP. And this one actually is built into the system, but I do recommend just running it outside of MICIP. There's very few things that I recommend actually doing in MICIP. I think it all just running it, doing it in the Google Doc, doing it in the enhanced document, or filling out your fishbones and some of those resources that I showed earlier. Just do it outside of the process, and then when you're done, go and plug it in while the team's not sitting there staring over your shoulder. But you can, the 5 whys is built in, and you can add those whys. And so there's research around the number 5 and why you would ask why 5 times. I've seen groups get to their bottom line in sooner than 5 questions. And I've also seen them that's taken a few more than that. If you start getting more than 5, you'll see that you're starting to just kind of talk yourself into circles. So if you're getting to 5, you should probably get into kind of toward the bottom of something. And it's as simple as that. You put your problem statement in, and you literally just ask why 5 times. And so for our example, we'd say the school needs to better respond to students' social and emotional health concerns. Then you would say, well, why does the school need to better, dig into their student health data? And then you'd say that, and then you'd say, okay, well, why that? And so you just kind of work yourself down through that, and that helps you kind of get down to the root cause. You can't start with a problem this big and do the 5 whys. It's just, it doesn't work. And so I recommend trying to narrow things down through maybe some of the processes that some of the others have shared or doing the fishbone. And then when you're ready to get into the detail about that one area, that's where you really dig into the 5 whys. So I have I do have an example I'll share here in a minute. So when you're doing the 5 whys, really try to think about that ladder of inference, and not working your way up and trying and bringing a lot of your beliefs and assumptions into it. Or if you are, recognize that you're bringing those in. So just try to stay down lower on the ladder. What's observable about this, what's factual about this, and try to answer as much there as you can. And if you are working your way up the ladder, at least be cognizant that, this is what I think, here's some of my assumptions that are behind this. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're working through the 5 whys. It's easy to work in our own background, biases, history when we're doing this process. The other thing that I really think about with the 5 whys is you want to really stay in the realm of what you can control. So you could answer a lot of the questions, you know, with things like, well, their parents never read to them when they were growing up. But, you know, that's not within the realm of something that we can control right now, unless you're trying to talk about like big system issues of getting books into parents' hands, you know, and that sort of thing. But just try to keep it in the realm of what you can actually control. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have a really large or adaptive problem, then really try to narrow things down first. Something like the fishbone diagram or like the force field analysis, which is one of the other links that we have in the other resource. Really try to get it down to something that is a little bit more manageable. It's not made for these big adaptive problems. And like we mentioned, you can always use it in conjunction with another tool. So I want to pause for just 1 second. Rob, can you maybe unmute and talk about that circle of influence versus the circle of concern?
Yeah, so I haven't gone through the school improvement process and a couple different places, and over the last couple of years, it's been a big part of what we've delved into. Is there's a circle of concern, the things that obviously will come up that we know are barriers and can prevent student learning, but we know that those things are outside of our control, outside of our influence. So it gives staff a space to be able to express those, but also to understand kind of the connections between what we can control, what we can't control too. So it just helps to enrich the conversation, because then, you know, they feel like that part of it's been heard, but at the same time, they understand that they can't necessarily do anything to change the trajectory of anything on that side of the equation.
So are you explicit with your staff when you work on this to
Yes.
you know, so
Yes.
do the staff start to get pretty good at knowing which category they belong
They
in?
do. They do. They start, it's pushing the flywheel. It's real slow at first, but then it starts humming along.
Yeah. So that's great, Rob. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think on that, keeping the statements in the realm of what can be controlled, I think I'm gonna work that language into my lexicon there. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
All right, so here is how that example that was used earlier, what they decided to dig into. So if you remember, they had 6 kind of causal categories that they brainstormed. And then what they decided to do was really dig into the one about the lack of professional learning. And so you can see what they did here. And it took them 4 whys and then they stopped. So we had lack of professional learning. Why do we lack professional learning around how to support the social emotional needs of our students? And so they said, because there are so many competing priorities for our time. So then you just turn that statement into a question. Why are there so many competing priorities for time? And so what their answer was, academic time is prioritized. And I think that's something that we can all relate to. Why is it prioritized? And so they answered, because schools are measured on how well students do academically. There's a lack of understanding that SEL skills and social emotional support will improve student academic performance. Aha. So why is there a lack of understanding that SEL skills and social emotional support will improve student academic performance? Because we've not educated staff and not educated all staff members and leaders about this connection. And so they felt like, you know what, there's really something that we could work with now, that we could set a goal around in this area of social emotional learning. And so that was kind of their thought process and kind of where they got to about that, to kind of dig into why these different things are there, and then maybe getting to the part that's the root cause of all of that they could dig into with their goal development. Now, if maybe we hadn't, you know, done this whole process, and they might have just said, you know what, I think the SEL curriculum we have is bad. I think we need to ditch it and let's just get a new one. So this process helped them really kind of zero in on all the possible things that could be going wrong, and then maybe dig in the one that they thought they could have the most influence over, like Rob was just talking about, right? Our professional learning of our staff, that's within our influence of, it's within our circle of influence, right? All right. So I'm just going to kind of check in at this point about some of our resources. I think we talked about most of them. So here with the 5 whys, there is some templates. There's a couple of tools that you can use. There's a video on the 5 whys kind of about how to complete it. So just some additional resources around the 5 whys in case that would be helpful for anybody. So at this point, we're going to kind of jump off of root cause, and we'll get into goals and targets and interim targets. But before we do, we had some good conversation around this. Just wanted to see if there was anything else that we didn't cover, or if there's any other questions or suggestions anybody would have in chat. All right, I'll go ahead and move on. If anybody else does have anything else, feel free to drop it in the chat. So this is going to be kind of our last continuous improvement topic that we have for today. And then we have some little reflection and a couple of connections to make at the end. But this is the last learning section for the day. Okay, so goals and targets and interim targets. So we're going to talk about the challenge statement, which is something that's kind of new in this whole process. And then we're going to get into setting the goal and then understanding those end targets and interim targets that we alluded to earlier. So the challenge statement comes right after you're done with the root cause. So I'm just going to pop over to MICIP and kind of show you what all that looks like. So earlier we had talked about the data story. We had uploaded our data. We had the conversations around the data. We went to analyze, and from here, this group used their own tool. And so then we uploaded the results that we put there. I think we did a force field analysis with this group. And you can actually add documents and things like that. So like if we had used graphic organizers or those sorts of things, we could upload those here. So then the next step after you analyze your root cause is you get to this challenge statement. And so the challenge statement is set up as an if then. So I'll show you some examples here, and then I'll show you what we put in for my ISD's example. So it's an if then statement that summarizes your root cause. And there really can only be one goal for a challenge statement. So again, if you end up with multiple challenge statements or multiple directions that you want to go with this, then you're probably going to want to make additional goals. So we have one data story, we have one challenge statement, that's going to come out to be one goal. So like it says here, if you come up with a lot of different root causes or you need multiple goals, then you might need to you could also make a broader goal and kind of address those in strategies. So we'll talk about more about that on day 2. So here's some examples. The GELN is the General Education Leadership Network. They're the group that runs the Early Literacy Task Force that does things like the essential practices and the coaching essentials. They helped organize all of the literacy coaches for the state. And so they have some theories of action posted on their web pages. So it says, if teaching teams and individual teachers are supported by quality coaching, then we can strengthen the literacy instructional practices for all Michigan teachers. So using that challenge statement, they can develop goals and strategies and activities and end targets and all this kind of stuff that they want to actually do that. So another example, if we have essential instructional practices in literacy articulated and adopted at the system level, then we can align research, practice, and resources and policy. So you can see that this whole idea of if-then statements or challenge statements or theories of action are all they're in use in all sorts of places. So thinking of that example that we shared earlier about the social emotional learning on the fishbone and that root cause analysis that team came up with, if staff have a better understanding of students' social emotional needs, then we can better engage students and improve outcomes. So that's the challenge statement that group had come up with around the social emotional goal around that social emotional data and root cause that they did. So then they would be able to move on and write a goal about that. So for my team at the Muskegon ISD, our data statement said, or excuse me, our challenge statement said, if we improve systems and processes around data collection and action, then we can impact positive outcomes for all learners. So that challenge statement is kind of, it's like a joiner between what you decided was your root cause and the direction that you are going to want to head with your goal. So that's kind of the purpose for that root cause and how to set that up. And I found that it was, once you could start to think about it as an if-then statement, it became really clear about how to write it. And it was, and it could be a meaningful step in the whole thing. So let's talk about the goal setting. Okay, so what we want to have is the goal. We want to have a measurable goal. So that's the way that it's actually defined in the system. And when I'm working with a team, we're trying to kind of stay out of that assist mentality of where we had prescribed goals and goals in all areas, goals in all accountable areas. We're trying to get away from that and focus in on what does the district really feel like is going to move things forward for their students, for their community, and for their teachers. And so we don't need to have a goal for everything that we're working on. That doesn't mean that if you set a social emotional goal, that you're not working on improving outcomes for kids in English language arts and math and science and social studies, or whatever the other categories might be. It just means that this is the goal that this team is going to really work on putting into place, monitoring, and actualizing. And so I am a big proponent of having a few number of goals that we're really going to dig into, set these outcome targets for, and work really hard on monitoring their implementation. So if you pack in 6 or 7 goals, there's no way that as a team you're going to be able to monitor the implementation of all those different things. Doesn't mean that you can't be working on 6 or 7 things, but this team really needs to have a focus, and having a small number of goals is the way to do that. So that kind of gets into that second bullet here of whatever you set, you need to be ready to implement, monitor, and evaluate those goals. So again, if you have 6 or 7 goals, is this team really prepared to implement 6 or 7 goals, to monitor the progress on it and adjust the things that they're doing, and then be able to evaluate if it's working or not? That's why we want to set a real small amount of goals. And so really establishing those district priorities to make those goal areas. A lot of people will start with their strategic plan or some other measure to really help them focus in on what's going to be really important for the whole organization. Then they start that data story about one of those areas. So page 27 of the MICIP process guide has a lot of other kind of things that you can consider kind of along the lines of what we just talked about, that really gets into, really what you should think about before you establish this goal. So when you establish a goal, you're really making a commitment to it that you're going to do a lot of things. And so the bottom line is keep it low. we don't want to have a ton of goals. So I wanted to talk about SMART goals. So right out of the process guide, they give a couple of examples about SMART goals. So in this case, it says across the middle school in the district, decrease student absenteeism at each grade from blank to blank in a certain amount of time, right? So SMART, this is an acronym. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So the other one here, so the first one was an affective goal about decreasing student absenteeism. So you can make a goal to decrease something, or you can make a goal to increase something, right? In this, they want to increase the percent of students that are feeling safe at school from 1% to another percent, as measured by an annual survey. So that's like the SMART goal, right? And so SMART means specific, measurable, achievable, relative, and timely. And so there are other acronyms out there that are in use. And if you were at our sessions last year, we talked about these there as well. But just to kind of give a quick overview of some of those, one of the ones is to make smarter goals. So it has all that specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely. But then it really works in how are you going to evaluate and how are you going to readjust? And that kind of gets at some of that more continuous nature of what we're shooting for. Some organizations are starting to do SMART goals. And so this one has all the regular stuff from the SMART goal, but then makes sure that they're going to work in examples about inclusion and equity as well. And remember, one of the main outcomes from the MICIP process is to really ensure the equity in those 3 areas that we discussed. So you can kind of expand a SMART goal as something that's probably in all of our lexicons, but being able to expand that out to be inclusive of some of these other areas is important as well. So back to our challenge statement, if staff have a better understanding of students' social emotional needs, then we can better engage students and improve outcomes. That was our challenge statement. And so the goal that this team wrote was they wanted to improve student engagement and social emotional outcomes across all subgroups as measured by the MIFI and school climate survey by June of 2024. So if you've done SMART goals before, then I would think that you might look at that and say, yeah, but they didn't say improve it from what to what, right? So from 30% to 50% or whatnot. I think that you'll find that if you try to include everything in your goal, it's gonna feel too narrow. Remember, these are district level goals. And so our MIFI might have been different between our middle school and our high school. Our MIFI might have been different between our 9th graders and our 11th graders. So, so if you get real specific and say, as measured by our 11th grade scores, and we want to move them from 20% to 50%, you're excluding a lot of possibility for other parts of your organization to get involved. So I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. You want to have a goal that's specific and measurable and all those things. And I think that this goal does. And then you can really dig into those specific numbers in your end targets. So it's not like we're going to completely ignore those. It's just that we want our goal to be broad enough that your whole organization is going to feel committed to that goal. And so if you get really specific around 3rd grade reading scores, then it's not going to be really meaningful to your high school, for example. I'm going to pause there. It looks like there's a question. When a building is assigned a goal, should it be building specific? So I'll kind of talk about the concept here, Jennifer, and then just know that your organization can always think about it the way that it makes most sense for you. When I'm working with organizations, and I think the overall concept of this is to not make building level goals. What you're working to do is to make an organizational goal that's important to everybody. And then when you're making your strategies and activities, that's when you start to think about, okay, what's our elementary school's part of this? And I'm going to assign that to this elementary school. What is our middle school's part of this? I'm going to assign this to my middle school. So that assigning part where we're assigning strategies to certain parts of our organization comes in the strategy selection and the activities we're putting into place, not so much at the goal level. That's not to say that you couldn't try to do that differently, but the concept of this is that district-led student school improvement, and to really make these goals to be something that's applicable to our whole organization, and then start thinking about what will each of our buildings or parts of our organization do to actualize that. Marcia, with so many changes, our district is discussing how much and which surveys to have the community, staff, and students complete this year. Does anyone have simple, necessary questions or Google formatted or something instead of us recreating? I welcome anybody to respond to that. And Marcia, if I forget, I have a link that I can give you at the end. Just remind me if I don't put it in by the end. But if anybody else has anything, please put it in the chat for Marcia.
But not only that, but if there are some really good tools out there, go ahead and add them to the resource repository. That way we are constantly keeping track of all the good stuff that's happening statewide.
All right, so moving on from this. So hopefully this will all start to come out a little bit here once we start looking at the end targets and interim targets. So when we make our end targets and our interim targets, like I said, that's when we can start to get really specific, and you can assign those end targets and interim targets real specifically to specific buildings. They could be organizational. But what we did here was, so if you remember our practice goal, improve student engagement and social emotional outcomes across all subgroups as measured by the MiFi and school climate survey. So this is talking about an increase in the percentage using the school climate survey. So they want to increase the percent of students that strongly or somewhat agree with I like school from 67% to 85% by June 2024. So, so they used, that's where they get that measurable part of the goal comes in. Okay, so that was the school climate survey. That was one of the things they mentioned in their goal. The other thing was the MiFi. Reduce the percent of students reporting that they feel unsafe or very unsafe at school by 6% by June of 2024 in the MiFi. So you can see that that was where they got really measurable about their goal. They were specific in what they wanted to do and by when and what they would use to measure it in their goal. And then they used the end targets to specify exactly what they're going to do there. Okay, so Beatrice asked, is this where we can specify a grade level or a school? You can, I've worked with several districts that did this. So I'm going to give a little bit of an off the cuff example. So if they had an ELA goal, then and their elementaries gave DIBELS and then their secondary gave NWEA, they would make two end targets. They would make a DIBELS end target and they would make an NWEA end target. So you can put in more. Now there's not a thing that you can click right now that says that assigns that end target to a specific building, but you can always type it in. You can always just say at our elementaries, DIBELS, at our secondary NWEA, but there's not like a drop down that you at this stage that you could select a specific building that it would go to. And you can make as many end targets as you want. So let's say that you wanted to make an elementary, middle, and high school end target around a certain goal, then you could make 3 of them. You could have many more than that if you wanted to, but again, it gets back to how much you can track.
So to be specific, you can always add that into the narrative versus the drop down. So the narrative is where you want to get specific, such as your question, Beatrice, is that then you can put it in there that's specific, even though the drop down or lack of a drop down doesn't address it, you can put it in the short response box.
Yep, exactly. Beatrice, does that help?
Sure did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, there's another quick end target. Can those end targets actually show up in the impact of some of the strategies in place? That way the strategies are assigned to buildings. Can the end target, Melissa, can you explain that verbally?
Yeah, so like one of our strategies is NWEA, or we use FastBridge or what have you, and those are assigned to buildings. And the impact is where you can, I don't know, maybe that's where I'm adding in when we're monitoring the strategy, that's where I put this data in for impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I'm shooting a little bit off the cuff on this one, but I think what we're getting at here is the end targets is, what do you want this to look like if it were successful, right? Like, so what would be your FastBridge scores that you're shooting for example? And then when we get into the monitoring aspect of it, there's a way to monitor for impact, and you can always go back to look at those scores, and that can be one measure of the impact of those scores. We're going to really dig into that on the monitoring day. So if that doesn't quite answer the question, hopefully you can come on the monitoring day, and we're really going to dig into monitoring and impact and how it relates back to end targets and interim targets.
Perfect.
Okay, so those were end targets. So those are, where do we want to be by the end of our goal? So you saw that this goal ended in June of 2024. Interim targets are like, what are the bite-sized pieces of that? So, so in this case, a lot of times it's just, where might we want to be by the end of year 1, by the end of year 2, if you're setting a 3-year goal, right? So you know that you're along the way, you're making some of the gains for it. I've worked with districts that said, you know, we're going to do our monitoring and we're going to do all that sort of stuff. We're not going to set any interim targets. We're just going to set our end targets, and then we're just going to monitor along the way. That's fine. You don't have to make interim targets. However, if you're the kind of person that likes some goalposts along the way to see how you're doing, with whatever goal you set, the interim targets is kind of the way to put that. So using that MiFi example, where the end target was to reduce the kids feeling unsafe or very unsafe by 6%, then an interim target is that at the end of this year, did it at least reduce by 3%? So that's kind of what the interim target is for. Again, not all districts use the interim targets, but they can be your goalposts along the way toward meeting that goal. The last thing that's available to you in this area are tasks. And so you can actually make tasks, you can assign tasks to, I think it actually goes to individuals. Now I'm trying to remember. But
You can assign individuals to those tasks. That's correct.
okay, perfect. So I'm just going to pop over here and just so you can kind of see this down here. You can come in to say, I want to add targets. Mike, where did the tasks go? Did they take it out?
Is it under?
No, it's under an interim target. Okay.
There you go.
Whew. For a minute there, I thought I was going crazy. So, so you'll see when at our ISD, when we did this, we ended up with 4 end targets, and we did not make any interim targets. So if you wanted to add, one of the things you can do for an interim target is a task. And basically you can just come in and you can just type out what that task is, and you can actually assign this to anybody that's in your MICIP system. And you can give a due date for it. And so this isn't something that I've seen a lot of people using, because usually it just kind of comes out through your strategies and activities, but it's definitely something that could go here that maybe is something foundational that you need to do before you can even get started. And so an example that I put here was that goes along with this team that was working earlier, is they wanted to create a forum for their students to come in to better understand the results of the school climate survey. And they wanted to make sure that they were representing some of their more traditionally underrepresented groups of students. So they made a task. So they gave the survey, they knew where they wanted to get with it, but they wanted to make this, they wanted to make a forum to have students come in and talk about some of the responses on there, and they were going to use that to help kind of drive some of their work forward. Could that also have been an activity that they put in under one of their strategies? Absolutely. But some of these things, it's like, hey, if this is a one-time get it done and then kind of check it off the list type thing, then you might want to create a task. I personally have not found that I've used that yet with my own MICIP team or any of the teams that I work with at my ISD, but it's there. There may be a kind of a niche use for it. Wondering if anybody's used the tasks yet and what their experience has been with that. If so, if you throw that you could throw that in the chat, and we'll maybe talk about that a little bit more. But personally, I haven't used it yet and haven't worked with a group that's used it. So a couple other details about these is, so I'm just kind of in the live MICIP here. My experience with this so far has been, I really like using the qualitative feature on this. You can use a quantitative feature where you say, I want to increase by a certain percentage, and then you can put in the measure, right? So like you could say, I want to see an increase by 6% of our school climate survey results around liking school, right? You can try to use it, but to me, it feels kind of like the assist objective maker. And anybody that used the assist objective maker knows that you don't want to try to use that thing ever again. So when I found that the quantitative one feels too much like that. And so I use the qualitative one and I just literally type in what I want. And so it doesn't mean that it's necessary. You can still make a quantitative statement, but it gives you the freedom to type in whatever you want. And so I find for myself, I always use the qualitative. And so you say, I'm going to make a qualitative, and then you can type in whatever you want. You don't have to worry about trying to say, was it an increase? Was it a decrease? And the percentage, oh, it didn't come out the way I wanted. I have to delete it, start over. So I personally use the qualitative all the time.
The qualitative and more is conversational.
Yes. Yep. It lets you type it out the way that you want to see it. If you have something that's quick and easy to use for this, you're welcome to do it. I've just found that the qualitative are easier. And I'll say, nobody's going to come in and look at your plan and say, well, you clicked qualitative, but this is really a quantitative goal. You did it wrong. Go back and do it again. That's not the way this works. This is here for you to try to make the best plan that you can. And if using qualitative is easier for you, then go for it. One of the main hurdles that I see is people will come in and they'll put their goal in and they'll forget to enter the due date. And so when they submit their plan, it says all their goals are overdue. So I know it sounds silly, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. So make sure that you're setting out your date. Really have a good conversation with your team. Is this a 1-year goal? Is this a 3-year goal? Is it a 5-year goal? Really talk through like the timeline on this and make sure that you get it put in there correctly. And you can always come back and fix it too. So if you put the wrong date in accidentally, it's okay, you can fix it. Okay, so the other thing that I want to show here is I'm going full circle back all the way to our first conversation of the day around uploading your data. So if you recall, at my example, we had 4 pieces of data uploaded. We had our determinations data, and then we had our target technical assistance data for each of the buildings. So, so we had 4 pieces of data uploaded, and now we have those 4 things that we can actually make our goal around. And you have to click one of these. So this is where we would, and I'll show you what our example was. So we made a qualitative piece around our determinations data. So we wanted to improve our results-driven accountability from 20% to 60% based off of that 2020 MISD determinations data report. And I can actually view that by clicking this object right here. So that will bring me back to that data object. So, so you have to connect it with something. So that's where I said, when you get to your goal, you're going to want to set goals and end targets and interim targets around these pieces of data that you uploaded. So if you uploaded your DIBELS data, then you'd connect to your DIBELS data. We want to move from 50% of our students or kindergartners being proficient to 80% of our kindergartners being proficient, right? So, this is where you connect those things. And so you can see right in there that you come in, you type in your goal, and then you click which one of these that it's related to. And you can only click one thing. So if you want, if you wanted to make a NWEA connection for your elementary school and your middle school, then you're going to end up with 2 end targets, one about the elementary data, one about your middle school data. It does give you the option at this point to add a measure. So remember how I said earlier, if you get to the end and you don't have all the data you need, and now you're realizing you need a different piece of data to set your end target around, you can add that here. So it's really easy to add more data if you need to. You can also go back to that data discovery step and add it there. Whew, I know that's kind of a lot of information. We're going to dig into more of it when we talk about strategies and monitoring. So if this is all a little bit of a whirlwind. Let's see here. Yes, I think we're kind of at the end of what I want to talk about for this. Just wanted to pause to see if there were any additional questions about that. I did not see anybody that came in and said that they've actually used the tasks portion. So I'm glad I'm just not the only one. Sounds like I'm in the everybody club. So this is just kind of a quick check-in at this point. I don't think we had really any resources that we were going to share around this. I think pretty much just everything that was in the presentation was everything that we wanted to share at this point. Mike, any other pointers or thoughts that you would add about the goals and targets?
Broad goals and then get more specific as you go. Just keep it really big to begin with. And as Dave said, is that not everything, all the good things that you're doing at a district level, not everything needs a goal. Really focus in on the specific goals you think that team and those teams can have the best impact upon.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next part. And so this is really, I want to talk about just a couple of things here. And so we just kind of called this section connections. And so the one question that I think may be on everybody's mind, and if not, now it's going to be, is how many goals do we need? So last year, over and over, we heard this is new. We want you to get out and work with your teams. We want you to form your teams. We want you to try the process. Just get one goal in there. And what we're hearing, and this is unofficial at this time, is that we'd really like to probably work toward having 2 goals. Again, this is unofficial, and there's not any edict out there saying that you need to have 2 goals and that sort of thing. But that's what we've been hearing in our continuous improvement circles. And so you might already have 1 goal in there. Now would be the time to think about, okay, what would be another goal that we're adding? And again, think about all those things that you're already doing, and those things that you already are wanting to make progress on, and you want to get better and really dig into and understand better. That's the sort of thing that you might want to add for that second goal. Hopefully, as we go along, we'll know a little bit more about this. We have 2 months that this group is going to be meeting. So if we have further detail on that as we go, we'll definitely let you know about that as we go. And so for those of you that did this process last year and went through the Discover data and root cause analysis and goal setting and interim and all those sort of things, it's almost like how does this become nonlinear, right? Is it just a one-time thing that we go in and we do this Discover data? Do we never have to go back to root cause analysis? And now we just are going to be monitoring the goal that we have in place. And we're really, our 3rd session is going to dig into this a lot more, but you can always go back based off of the monitoring data. And this might get to some of the questions that were asked earlier, I think by Melissa. You can always take that monitoring data that you have, and as you're learning about that, you can come back and update your data stories and those sorts of things. You might find that the root cause that you selected was not the right one. And so we really want this to be a nonlinear process. You're going to have new data this year. You're going to want to go back and you're going to want to upload that data and add it to your data set. And you're going to want to build off of that. And we're going to talk a lot more about that on the monitoring day. But this is a nonlinear process, and you're going to have different entry and exit points. But once a goal is established, we really want to use the system to make sure that we're accurately representing everything that's going on. It becomes our historical record, and something for people to refer back to when there's turnover, or hey, we've worked on this goal before. Here's what we learned when we did it. So I really recommend keeping it updated and being in there. And we're going to talk a lot more about that on at our 3rd session. So then what about the consolidated app? So one of the things that everybody, I think, maybe was hoping for out of the whole process was that we would be able to establish our goals and strategies and activities. And then when we were doing our consolidated application, we could pull those strategies and activities over and not have to have so much justification written and those sorts of things in the consolidated application. Be really easy to show a connection between the funds we're applying for and the planning processes that we went through. As we talked about earlier, that's not yet in place. The mechanisms I've seen it demonstrated, but that wasn't available to us this year, as anybody that worked on the consolidated app knows. So hopefully that'll be something that's ready in the future. I'm not holding out that's going to be ready for our 22-23 consolidated app, which is probably going to be opening up here maybe even before our current consolidated app is completely due. So, so that's a little bit of a conundrum right now. One thing that I will say is anytime that I talk to the Office of Educational Supports or Ben or Terry, the leads on MICIP, is I'm hoping that we continue to have the flexibility to keep our goals narrow and keep our goals or keep the goals broad, but a small amount of them, and not have to get to the point where, like we were in Assist, where there always had to be a one-to-one correspondence between what was in the consolidated app and what's in our plans. I think that we'd get back to that situation of needing 5 goals and 1,000 strategies, and we don't want to be there. So I'm hoping that they'll continue to give us the flexibility around focusing on the goals that are important to us, and then kind of disconnecting the consolidated app process from that and not having to make those one-to-one correspondences. So apologies if you don't have to worry about all of that in your role, but for those of you that do, that's my personal preference on that. And it's something that I talk to MDE about quite regularly.
Anna, does what Dave just said kind of answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yep. And I I think that advocacy could be important here. So, if you feel like what I just said about, let's maintain some really solid goals that are really important to us and not throw everything but the kitchen sink in there. I think being in good communication about with your OES rep or others about that would be really important. Okay, so that wraps up all our content for today. I do have 2 reflection activities that I'd like to engage in. So the first is on our dashboard, we have down at the very bottom, it says reflection, and then there's some Jamboards. And the Jamboards are set up by the first letter of your last name. So Jamboards only let 50 people in at a time. And so I thought, oh, I'll break it into 3, but now we have 150 people here. So if you can't get into your Jamboard, try a different one. And it doesn't matter which one you go to, honestly. I was just trying to break it up enough that there would be enough room for everybody to get in there. And basically in the Jamboard, it just asks a very simple reflection question. What are the main takeaways that I plan to take back to my district team? And so you're welcome to throw as many in there as you want. If somebody else put something exactly what you were thinking, just drag one of these stars over to it. And Mike and Hilda and I really read over these real closely in between to know what were some of those important things that that people were gathered out of this so that we can make sure to emphasize and move forward with those. So if everybody could take just a couple of minutes to do that. And also there is a very brief feedback survey. And we look at both of those things really closely in between to make sure that we're hitting everybody's needs at our professional learning. So if you could do both of those things, we try to give you the time to do that. So wanted to see if you could do both of those things before you left today, because you know how it is, as soon as you leave, then it's really hard to come back to those sorts of things. I think that was everything that we had. So at this time, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn off the recording, and Mike and I are available for anybody that has any specific questions. You can pop them in chat or even unmute and ask at this point.